1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 17, pray without ceasing. Ephesians 6:18, praying always. Romans chapter 12 verse 12, be devoted to prayer. Colossians chapter 4 verse 2, continue in prayer. Why all this emphasis on prayer? Jesus speaking to his disciples in John chapter 15 verse 5, he says, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abides in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. The emphasis here is that without Jesus, without the vine, the branch can do nothing. The believer is the branch. Jesus is the vine. Cut off the branch from the vine, the branch will die automatically. There's no way the branch can produce fruit. What produces life for the branch is found in the vine. How does the believer connect to Christ? It is through prayer. It is prayer that connects us to Christ. Do you have weak connection with Jesus? Do you have no connection at all? Or do you have a strong connection? Why are we instructed to pray always? What does prayer do in the life of the believer? Prayer does what God wants. I'm sure many of us think that prayer does what we want. No, prayer actually does what God wants. Prayer is what carries out the will of God in our lives. Prayer is what enables you to know the will of God and to do the will of God. Are you a believer who doesn't even have a clue on the will of God? Are you a believer who lives outside the will of God and you don't even know the will of God? I want to encourage you to spend more time in prayer. Jesus speaking to his disciples, he said in John chapter 5 verse 19, he said, the things that I see my Father do, these are the things that I do. In the place of prayer, Jesus sees the will of God. He knows the will of God and he does it. In Luke chapter 11 verse 2, Jesus teaching his disciples to pray. He says, when you pray, say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That tells us that it is not automatic that the believer will do the will of God. It is when the believer prays that the believer is strengthened to do the will of God. Once you stop praying, you will stop doing the will of God. And once you stop doing the will of God, you start doing your own will. You start doing your own things. That is the beginning of backsliding for the believer. Because Proverbs chapter 14 verse 14 says, the backslider in heart is full of his own ways. Are you full of the ways of God, or are you full of your own ways? Prayer strengthens you to obey God. The book of Matthew chapter 26 verse 41, Jesus said, my spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus is actually saying that my flesh is weak in obeying God. My flesh doesn't want to do the will of God. My flesh doesn't want to obey God. But then he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And while he was in the garden and praying, he was strengthened supernaturally. And by the time Jesus rose up from prayer, he was strengthened to obey God. Are you struggling to obey God? Are you struggling to do what he says? Then spend more time in prayer, and then you'll be strengthened to obey God. Prayer prevents failure. If you do not pray, you will fail. Jesus speaking to his disciples also in Matthew 26:41 in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said to them, watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. In other words, if you don't watch and pray, you will enter into temptation. And it was obvious, because they didn't watch and pray. It was just a matter of time. They fell into temptation. Are you a believer who keeps falling into sin over and over again? You have addictions that you find difficult to pray. Jesus in the book of Luke chapter 18 verse 1, he says he gave them a parable to this end, to show them that men ought always to pray and not to faint. Another translation says, men ought always to pray and not to behave badly. Once you stop praying, you will fail. You will fall into temptation. You will faint. You will behave badly once a believer stops to pray. So prayer enables you to overcome temptations. Prayer enables you to overcome sinful desires. Actually, prayer changes your appetite. Some of us have sinful appetite. We just have appetite for wrong things. We have appetite for things that do not glorify God. If you are such a person, I want to encourage you to spend more time in the place of prayer. Your appetite will change. God will consume your wrong appetite, and then you begin to desire the things of God. You begin to pursue God rather than pursuing the things of this world. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, neither can you except you abide in me. And so I say to you, my brothers and sisters, Pray always and continue instant in prayer. God bless you.